I have been a journalist all my life. Before that, for a few years, I was working with the United Nations in New York and then in Damascus in Syria. Came home in 1966 and became a journalist. I remained a journalist, a career journalist, that is to say, till about 1990, when for a brief while of less than a year, I was the information advisor to the Prime Minister of India. And his government didn't last very long, so I didn't last very long in government either, by the grace of God. I came out to find that I didn't have any more jobs in regular journalism left after that stint, but I became a columnist, and I've been a columnist for several newspapers on politics, on domestic politics, political economy of India, and in international affairs, as these connect with India's foreign policy. For the last 13, 14 years. I've also written a number of books on global political economy, India's political economy, and and the whole economic transition brought about by globalization in various countries as well as in the world as a whole.
So you have actually these three pillars: economy, economics, political science, and philosophy. You know India before the partition, Pakistan. So how has it changed? Looking at these three different pillars, how has India changed during your life? What would you say are the most significant steps forward, backwards, sideways, whatever?
I'll try and summarize. This is like a subject for a two-volume study or something, but I'll try and summarize my personal sort of impressions as briefly as I can. When I was very young, India, particularly rural India, but also urban India, was poor. It was fatalistic. It accepted poverty, and it accepted whatever came with it. A lot of it was frequent outbreaks of disease, high infant mortalities, in fact, a low overall lifespan. All this was accepted. And one result of that was that it was a very, very peaceful society. I mean, almost the only issues on which there were serious conflicts that led to deaths was on disputes over land, because land was always valuable. Other than that, it was truly a peaceful society. I wouldn't call it stagnant, because there was already a strong industrial sector developing. But for most of India, that was something separate. Since then, the changes that have taken place are mind-boggling when I look back at them. For one thing, there's been a rapid urbanization of India. Now about 35, nearly 40% of the population lives in the cities, when less than 10% did so when I was, say, in my early teens. Even of the remaining 60 to 65%, half the people no longer work on agriculture. They have non-agricultural employment, everything from building homes, plumbing, electricity, service sector, services, and so on, but still located broadly in the rural areas. So agriculture strictly only employs now about 1/3 of the population of the country, when it used to employ 3/4 when I was born. That's a second change. One result of this change is the shift from a subsistence to a cash economy. Now, in a cash economy, what you can buy more things, you can earn more, but also you can earn less. And so a new element came in and is now very predominant, and not just in India, it's happened to every industrializing country, which is insecurity. And with insecurity is very often, the way that it's described in Western literature is as the revolution of rising expectations. In fact, rising expectations is the bright side of a much darker thing, which is growing insecurity. So your expectations are you propel yourself upwards so that you get further and further away from the abyss that is opening below you. Now, this is what has been happening in India too. Fortunately for us, I think, and from the social point of view, our growth rate during the first 40 or 45 years of independence, from roughly 1945 till 1990, 1947 to say 1992, exactly 45 years, was slow. The average growth rate was under 4%. And therefore things changed slowly and people had time to adjust to the changes. This time element is terribly important. Therefore the country remained stable, peaceful, and had its own, there was no need for traditional loyalties, traditional connections with town and country to be broken, and they weren't broken abruptly. So no extremist movements came up, as came up in Europe with rapid urbanization at the end of the 19th century. From 1992, we've had a massive acceleration in growth. The growth rate has gone up from 4% to an average of 7.2, but for about 10 of the last, of these, not 10, but 12 of the last 22 years, we've had growth rates of well over 8%. And so what that has actually done is a 7.2% growth rate actually means that every 10 years your GDP doubles. And over 25 years, your GDP has gone up by about 5 or 6 times. This is not equally distributed. It's also not as unequally distributed as a lot of critics, particularly academic critics, claim. But yes, there has been a rise in inequality. Nothing like China's, for example. Nothing like Mexico's, which are the terrible examples of inequality. India has also got substantial inequality and growing, but again, nothing like that. One reason is that agriculture has done very well throughout this period and continues to do well. And agricultural growth gives you broad-based prosperity. The the other change is the rise of a middle class in the urban areas. It has got some of the worst features of new middle classes. It's also got some of the best features. The most important change that I've seen in attitudes is the disappearance of fatalism. Growing realization that you really can make your own future if you try hard. And people try very, very hard in India. So,
That's okay, that's okay.
The degree of ingenuity among the aspiring middle class, the people at the bottom who are just trying to move into the middle class, is absolutely extraordinary. And we have an interesting word for it in India. It's called jugaad. Jugaad refers to anything from patching together anything that's broken and making sure that it doesn't get thrown away and making it work after a fashion. Maybe an old car or an old, mixie or an old radio or something. To, in fact, finding some way of making money, which no one has thought of before. So this ingenuity is very much present, and it is one of the most exciting things that you see. There's a huge amount of inflow of people into cities and out of home states to live in and work in other states. Like China, we have about 150 million Indians who are living outside their home states and working outside their home states. But unlike China, and unlike certainly any other part of the world, this has never created any tension with the local population. Now, I do not know the reason why. No one says they're taking away our jobs. Partly it is because growth in India has been somewhat uneven, and the people are attracted to the rapidly growing states, and rapidly growing states don't have a shortage of employment. So far, we haven't got to a state of prolonged stagnation in which people will start thinking about holding on to what they have and keeping outsiders away. So we have been very lucky in that respect. Rapid economic growth has actually led to more and more people moving from one part of the country to another to work and settling down and getting to know other parts of India. And being, in fact, unified. It's been a unifying feature. It's been the main reason why a democracy has actually acted as a way of cementing the country together instead of pulling it apart.
So, as you just described, I mean, India is really living or is still living through a huge transformational process. I want to focus a bit more on politics and the link to economics. What are what do you consider the major challenges? I mean, the last 20 years have been incredible. A new middle class grew up. I mean, with the wealth came into, with it a lot of inequality, with it good and bad things. How does all this challenge the political infrastructure you have?
The, as you know, we have India is a democracy, and it's a multi-tiered federal democracy. There's center, there's states, and there's also a third tier of kind of autonomous districts within states, which have considerable autonomy in deciding programs on education, on health, on culture. And then there's the last stage, which is the grassroots village democracy. This democratic structure, particularly the first two, the top two states, and to some extent the third, that means the central government, the state governments, and the autonomous third tier district councils. These these three tiers have been used to satisfy the desire to retain one's ethnic identity. India has at least 25 major ethnic groups with major languages, often with completely different roots, and at least 300 dialects. And the language, in a sense, is the central but not only defining feature of distinct identity, which includes food, clothes, music, literature, and language, of course, and to a small extent, minor variations in religion, except that there are also major religions in India. That's a separate issue. The danger that we faced was trying to copy the European nation-state model. Right next door to us, Pakistan tried to do so. It's equally diversified as India. They have four major ethnic groups and a number of minor groups in West Pakistan alone. And they had the Bengalis in East Pakistan in the old days, trying to create a unitary, homogenized nation-state, blew them apart into two, and is threatening the unity even today. In India, what we did was we actually accommodated every ethnic identity within the federal structure. So what we have is an ethnic federalism. It's not an administrative federalism. Canada is an administrative federalism with one exception, Quebec, which is based on ethnicity. Australia and the US are entirely administrative federalisms.
So would you say that this is the secret why it's really possible in India that all these different kind of people really live peacefully together?
Yes, it is the most important part. There are other things. The second that I mentioned earlier is growing freedom to move, the freedom to move and work any way you like. But this is the most important part of the secret. What it means is people feel that their core identities are safe. They go home, let's say for the holidays or for, the harvest season if you're a seasonal worker or something, and you go back to an environment which is entirely yours, entirely recognizable. The people are there, your language is there, everything is there, the culture is there, the village is unchanged. But when it comes to aspiring to a job, aspiring to a place in a medical college or an engineering college, or aspiring for the highest post in the land, you can try to get into any of the institutions throughout the whole of India. You can look for a job in any part of India. It is your right. You can move anywhere, you can live anywhere, you can work anywhere. So the field of opportunity is giant, and the field, the core area which defines your identity is absolutely safe. So every group in India has this base and an area of competition. It moderates competition. it allows competition without threatening identity. I wanted to add one more thing. The what this the unity has come at a price. It's unified the elites, the ethnic elites, and through the center state political structure, has created a class of rulers. And that class of rulers, if it is good and responsible to its people, would give you would give you totally successful democracy. But for various reasons, that has not been the case. The political class has varied widely, but a large proportion of the political class consists of people who are ruthless, unscrupulous. They're criminals or bordering on criminals for a variety of reasons which take long to explain. And so that the level of accountability to the public in the government is very, very low. And where this has begun to matter is that with the accelerated economic growth, growth requires land, growth requires resources, whether it's forest resources, whether it's water, whether it's land. And the poor are being deprived of these, and being deprived of these without being given either adequate compensation, or what is really needed is a share in the future benefits from the land that is being taken away from them, so that they're not being made partners in development. And I've come to the conclusion that the very process that created this unity of the country by horizontally integrating the elites of ethnic groups has created a kind of a crust of not the best and most savory decision makers who feel no accountability to the poor. So the poor are exploited, and now what you're getting therefore is a rising class conflict, which in fact Indian democracy is not able to resolve. It's not even understood it fully. I hope that in the coming years it will, but it hasn't happened yet.
Where does this understanding lack? Where do you see people don't understand? They won't or they don't? I mean...
They won't, and they don't. Those who do understand it know that if they were to try and meet, let's put it simply. I need some land for my factory or for my coal mine. I go to the government and I say, there's coal there, or that's a good place for the factory. It's near a railway line. Can I have the land? The government doesn't say, go and talk to the villagers and buy it from them. That, even if you do that, many villagers will say yes, others will say no. Then you come back to the government and you say, what will I do? I need that land. If the government takes the land from them at maybe a present market price, but they lose their land completely. That land then they see comes under industry, it becomes 30 times or 40 times more productive, and they have no share in the matter in it. So in the meantime, they've spent their money. They don't know how to handle large sums of money. They become beggars around their own land. This has been happening more and more and more. So this kind of division of the people, anger, sometimes violent anger, is beginning to emerge in the poor. And we have not yet found a way of resolving this. The people who are giving the land know perfectly well what they're doing and what will happen. But they're doing it because they get a kickback from the industrialist for their pockets.
Corruption.
That's it.
So we were saying people, they do know about it, and people who...
But the vast majority say, oh, these people are standing in the way of development. We must move them aside. Okay. Those who are not involved in the money taking, people can be remarkably naive. And particularly when it serves their interests, they can be deliberately naive. So these are some of the problems we face. The only solution is for the rebellion against it to go into the political, democratic voting system fast enough to make some kind of violent rebellion unnecessary. It's beginning to happen. There's more and more of awareness that governments need to perform. For one thing, there are two factors that are mitigating, factors in this. One is that there is a substantial intelligentsia which is aware of this and is very articulate in the media. Not sufficiently so, because there are also great lobbyists from the other side, from the side of big capital. And the other is that you, in the voting patterns of the last 10 years, you see an increasing emphasis on performance. People
What do
are
you
not.
mean by this?
What it means is that people are not voting because of inherited loyalties. I'll vote for him because he's from my caste or
Okay.
from my religion. Enough people are saying, I'll vote for this government because it has performed well, or because it has, I will vote against it because it has not performed well, to start, giving you a result-oriented democracy. And that will, of course, mitigate class struggle and class conflict. And I hope that, it's a question now of which one,
Well,
which of
yeah.
these processes moves faster. And the need in democratic reform in India today is, in fact, to ensure that the process of responsible government and accountability of government to people is increased more rapidly than the anger builds up.
Do you really think that the political class is aware of this? Are they ready for it, or is it?
They're aware of it, but they do not feel that they can change the political system, because the political system requires money to run. Today, something like 60 to 70% of all the seats in parliament and in national legislatures are held by people who have created clientelist networks in their constituencies of give and take. Whole power structures with different differential levels of money and favor swapping, so that they give you the money, they make sure that to get the votes for you to stay in power, provided you make sure that they continue to benefit from all the things that you can do while you're in power. And this structure, to break it down and set up another structure, is very, very difficult. It requires a huge amount of money, and we don't have a legal system for raising funds for fighting elections, unlike Central Europe, Germany, Holland, etc., etc. And no, there's no state funding for elections, for example. And the result is that the political party chiefs don't have a lot of money. The political party members collect a lot of money in their constituencies. They're more powerful than the leadership. You cannot change them.
Right.
So you may know the need for change, but even those who know the need for change will not act.
Because the system isn't set up.
Yeah.
When I was talking about a grassroots movement, I wasn't so much. I did refer to the fourth tire, but I'm also referring to the things which were just going to happen in Delhi, like after the rape thing. Like, there was a
Public
new public protest. There was a new political party which just was founded in November, this AAP. I, at least as a foreigner, understand it as somehow a grassroots movement, a people movement. Do you see any really serious power of the people changing the system?
This is cumulatively going to change the system. It is part of the process of change. At least we hope it will change fast enough. That's the important thing. The important point about this is it actually began some time back. It didn't begin with the rape. It didn't begin with the Anna Hazare movement of 2011. It began as a series of great protests against abuse of human rights by people in high places, usually of women. There were 7 cases over the previous 4 or 5 years where women, beautiful women, television anchors and so on, had got in some way drawn the attention of powerful people. In many cases, even sort of created relationships with them, but eventually been sort of discarded and they've been sort of mysteriously killed, or molested, and things like that. So these things had come up in the media, and the media spearheaded a huge anger, which forced government to act on all of these. Otherwise, the temptation was that these are all government officials quietly bury the thing. That had been happening, and it came to a head in 2010, 2011, because of the fact that the Commonwealth Games, which were international, we found a lot of corruption in their management right there in London, So much so that one of the acts of corruption was in a function that the Queen was going to preside over. And when she found out about this, she cancelled her thing, and she refused to preside over the handing over of the Olympic torch.
Yeah, right.
Baton, I think. So that really shocked people here. And then after that, huge numbers of stories began to come out.
Yeah.
We have an organization, the Auditor General's Office in India, which audits government expenditure. And they began to find all the irregularities they were finding suddenly became front page news, and the huge sums of money that were being made out of this. So that spiraled into a movement for reform and for setting up an ombudsman to oversee government accountability. That movement got derailed slightly and ended up by this one gentleman trying to create a political party. He's not going to go very far, the one that was created in November. I can guarantee you that the Indian political system doesn't work like that. It is not. The system is not solely issue-based just now. He's years and years and years ahead of his time, and it'll never be like that. People who vote for 50 reasons, including clan, kinship, caste, neighborhood. He's my neighbor from the next village. I'm going to vote for him no matter what he is. That kind of thing, and then also issues. So 4 or 5% of the vote shifts from one party to the other and gives you a new policy. But you're not going to get 50% of the people moving to a totally new, unknown party. And so that party is going to fail. Pity of it is that when it fails, it will give a setback to the movement. So what you're getting now is a public realization, increasing public demonstrations of anger in the streets. That public demonstration of anger is a sign of feeling disempowered in democracy. Okay. Our democracy has somehow managed to disempower its people instead of empowering them, so that the mechanisms of democracy are not working, so they go out to the streets.
So, but this can become serious, right?
When you go out to the streets, the government takes very serious notice of you and things start working. Mm-hmm. That is our tradition also. Okay. We did it to the British under Mahatma Gandhi, and people are doing it here again. They're using the same technique against a free India as in the Indian freedom movement used against Britain.
Yeah. So, I mean, in India, like, I was just reading about the numbers. You have like 500 million people under the age of 27. This is almost...
Maybe about that, yeah. 40%.
I mean, these people, it's like 40% of the country, they at least, you could say, have some decent kind of education. They, can read or write. They have an idea about all these digital technologies. Don't you think, I mean, they are today in their early 20s, that this is a new force coming up, which is, or which might be possible to drive change faster?
It is driving change faster. I mean, these are the people who are out in the streets. These were the people who were with Anna Hazare. It was predominantly a movement of the young, although a lot of older people also joined it. The two types of people were in it. The young were there, young professionals were there in very large numbers, and older, retired people from the armed forces, from the government and so on, joined because they wanted to go back to a cleaner and more accountable system of government that they had themselves known when they were young.
So how could you imagine new ways? I mean, you've been writing for politics all your life. What kind of ways can you imagine?
There are only two reforms are required to start the process.
Please.
One is state funding for elections. You have to have a very solid fund, which is distributed according to the share of the vote of recognized political parties in the previous election. You have one fund, say 50% of the total money for the national parliament and 50% for the state legislatures, divided according to the size of each state in terms of its voter population. And within that, the share of each political party is the proportion of votes they got in the previous election. If you do that, then there will be a core large sum of money that the leaders of the parties at the central and state levels can use to put up first-class candidates, people who really know how to govern, who have great reputation with the people, but who today cannot get into politics because they don't have the money to fight an election. Uh, Now, some parties will take advantage of this. The bigger the party is, the less it will take advantage of this. But then they'll be threatened. Or in one or two elections, they'll find that they're losing seats to the newer, smaller parties. And they will then, political competition will then work towards making all of them start using this money to bring in gradually, more and more well-qualified people. And you can't break the clientelist system overnight. There's no law that can do it.
No.
It can only be undermined by political competition from below. And to start that political competition running, you've got to have a state fund for elections. The second is accountability of the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is today completely immunized, all but completely immunized from any sort of charge or accusation by the public that it is not doing its job, or that it is being corrupt, or it is demanding a kickback. Because there is an article in the Constitution, Article 311, which says that no one who is a government servant at the central level government or the state government can be in any way punished or reprimanded or demoted or dismissed from work or whatever, or imprisoned or anything, without the authority of the, this cannot be done without, by anyone of a status less than the status of his appointing officer. Now, in the central government, the appointing officer is the President of India.
Okay.
In the state government, the appointing officer is the governor, which means that you have to get the permission of government to prosecute a member of the government. And needless to say, governments protect themselves and their own people, and this permission is very seldom given. So there is near complete immunity. One result of this is that if you have a combination of a corrupt politician who wants money to fight the next elections, or just to get rich, or to make his relatives rich, and he needs permissions and licenses and things and the bureaucracy has to give it, he forms alliances with the bureaucrats and says, you will get a part of the money too. In no time at all, the entire bureaucracy of India gets corrupted, and that's what's happened. The combination of these two, the corrupt bureaucracy, which is 19 million people, and the corrupt politicians, gives you a structure of total disempowerment of the honest, of the decent, of the human, of the poor. And that's the only, there have been two reactions to this in India. The first is the rise of the NGO movement. The NGO movement in India, there are 1.2 million NGOs in this country. There may be more now, but the largest number ever. And the majority of them don't depend, in fact the vast majority don't depend upon foreign funds. They collect the money. And many of them are very small. But they are rooted, very deeply rooted here. And they fight for the rights of the poor. And this has had a humanizing effect because they act as the intermediary between the poor and the civil servants and politicians. And all civil servants and politicians know that it is better to be honest most of the time and corrupt only some of the time. You know?
So this is
So it works.
an ideal Indian mixture.
Well, it's not an ideal mixture, it is a real mixture. And it's a mixture in most countries in different ways, but it certainly is in India. The second thing that has been protecting our democracy is that people in desperation, when they find that the bureaucracy does not do its duty, they go to the courts. And a thing has developed called public interest litigation. And they began in 1979 when the Supreme Court gave a milestone judgment saying that the people have a right to appeal against the government if it does not do what it has committed itself to doing in the laws that it has passed. So to enforce the action on those laws, you can go to the courts. That's public interest litigation. You don't have to be directly affected. You can do it on behalf of the people as a whole.
As a cause, so to speak.
As a cause.
Yeah.
And public interest litigation has done wonderful things in India so far. So again, but these are both, you know, in a sense, reforms that soften the hard edges of disempowerment. They're very hard to mobilize. Still, the vast majority of the people, they face an officer who does not do something until you give them money. And they say, should I go the long route of going to a court and finding an NGO that would take up my cause and go to the court? Or should I just give the man some money and get my work done? And he gives the man money and gets his work done. So it's just on the edges, it softens the hard, the edges of corruption and disempowerment, but that's about all. And now people say it's not enough.
Okay, so my very last question would be, what can the West learn from India? If you would mention like 3 topics.
1, patience. Huge countries like this take time to change.
Yeah.
And change has to come from inside. You cannot impose change from outside. Today the West is building democracies in all kinds of countries where they first destroy the country. And then they say we'll build democracy from the ashes. It doesn't work. If India is a model of anything at all, it is a model of how the most severe problems in the most gigantic and most complex country the world has ever known get resolved, but it just takes time. That the time span in which we expect change now, particularly in the internet age, is a time span that just doesn't make sense in terms of human reactions and human institutions. And which means that if you find that there is a bad government in Chile or in Brazil tomorrow or in Egypt day after tomorrow, the answer is not to go and bomb it out and say we're going to start afresh. But you just wait, be patient, and allow the internal forces at work to change things. The media in the West make this very difficult to do. No government, no politician is able to stand up to the media. And you're having now a kind of what Aristotle had described as the worst kind of democratic populism. And he said, beware of that democracy, or populist democracy is the worst thing that can ever happen. He wrote in the Republic, on page 3 of the Republic, if you please, a very long book. And that's what we have today. And the West is infected with it much more than we are. And I think that looking at India, which is a democracy, which is changing, which is doing by and large quite well, thank you, in spite of all its problems. I think the first thing is one learns is patience. Second thing one learns is humility. We don't have all the answers. Indians don't have the answers. I don't have the answers. All my life I've spent worrying about things that can go wrong and then looking all the time for the things that I might have missed which are going right and which give me hope for the future. And by and large, the balances remain on the side of hope rather than despair. And that I have learned humility myself, having had a thoroughly vested education. I think that's the second thing that's very important the West can do. The third, I think, is there are critical inputs, as we were talking earlier, on education, on technology, and so on, which can make the process of social transition itself much smoother, which can empower the poor in non-revolutionary, non-violent ways. I think look for those things. Empower the poor in non-political, non-revolutionary, non-violent ways. And education is the obvious answer. I would say that these are the 3 things that I would suggest.
So may I add one more question?
Sure.
In relation, I know you've written some stuff about the relationships India and China. What are, the advantages again of India to, go faster on the track than China?
Well,
or go better, not faster, but better? And is it the democratic system which is deeply rooted here in India, which will help India to succeed, or What do you think?
Well, there are striking similarities in the development of China's political economy and India's political economy. The similar, and most people look at the differences between China and India, but I think the similarities are more important. One, China had a state planning system from 1949 till 1981
We have 2 minutes then.
and grew very slowly. India did the same from 1947, 1951 to 1991. We were 10 years behind them. Both accelerated rapidly. After that, both of them became increasingly unequal in distribution. Both of them were relatively honest societies which became rapidly very corrupted. In both of them, social discontent has risen very rapidly. China's problem is that it does not have institutions that can deal with social discontent. It is a totally monolithic communist system. The communist system is not important. It's even more so, it's a Confucian system, which is even more monolithic and much older than the communist system. And India has the institutions of democracy, and that's this great advantage. And they do respond, but at the moment, they're responding a little too slowly.